Hi, welcome to SharePoint Recovery for the Unitrends System Administration course. By the end of this module, you'll be able to identify your recovery approach and options. You'll also be able to recover your entire SharePoint database or itemized content. First, let's take a look at determining your recovery approach for SharePoint. As with all the other modules, almost the first question whenever you have to ask yourself and you're going through a recovery is, where are the backups that I need to recover? Are they on the appliance already? Do I need to go back long-term to cold copies, or am I looking for something off-site on the hot target? When you start with that local backup appliance, all those backup catalogs are kept on the system ready for recovery. I'm going to show you those recoveries in the demo. Now, if you have to go back to a cold copy long-term, weeks, months, years ago, you have to make sure that you import that backup on the media back to the appliance. Then you'll see it as an imported backup copy, and you can then do local backup recovery from that imported backup. If it is a hot backup copy sitting on that offsite target, those backup catalogs on the hot target offsite are kept ready for recovery. You don't have to do anything, but you have to make sure that you have hardware over there ready to receive SharePoint. You have to make sure you have your server recreated over there from bare metal, or build a new farm and go through that recovery process over there from the hot backups. Now, the next question you really ask yourself is, what type of recovery am I doing here? We do have the ability with SharePoint to do full or granular recovery. Right? When we break down the full recovery first, you can recover single server only, not the full farm, from either a full or a differential backup. You can recover a single server only, not a full farm, from either the full or differential backup. And it must be recovered back to the original farm. All right, so if you have a full farm and you need to do full recovery, you have to build out a new farm and then use granular recovery. We're going to show you that next, to put the farm back. You cannot restore a full farm, only single server instance, if you need to do full recovery. Now, if you are using granular recovery, we use a product called Kroll On-Track Power Controls. Right? You can mount our recovery point and use their product to recover from our backups. You can only do that from a full backup, though. You can't do that from a differential. You cannot do that from a differential. Once again, we talked about it in the SharePoint backup module. If you have SharePoint SQL databases that are larger than 250 gigs, you may want to run SQL backups against those, and you may need to do SQL recovery on those. Once again, check the SQL recovery module on how to recover SQL databases. If you are doing catastrophic recovery, it is only supported for that single server farm instance, by the way. Right? Not a full-fledged farm. Once again, if you're doing full farm recovery, you need to build out that farm and then use the granular recovery to put your farm back. We break down performing a granular recovery for SharePoint. Once again, it does take that third-party tool, the Kroll On-Track Power Controls. There is a video tutorial out there for you on the Unitrends website under the video tutorials. Once again, when you're performing a granular recovery, you're going to identify the full that you're going to use. Once again, you cannot use a differential. You're going to make sure that you can see that recovery point in your catalog. So you can confirm that there's adequate space on the target. Unitrends is going to expand this out. You want to make sure that you've got some space to do that. It might affect retention. You want to make sure that there's already not a share in place, because you can only have one share running at a time, and the second one you queue up, it will fail. You're going to select Recover Files up in the toolbar at the top, and that's going to create your recovery object, the mount point off of the appliance. All right, you can go out there and view and copy the path and do whatever you need, and you're going to take that part and use it on Kroll. You're going to point Kroll to it and go through their procedures to recover the itemized content. There is a KB article out there, 3774, talks about the recovery process, and I think it even references the video tutorial. Once again, whenever you're done with any of these recoveries, whether it's SharePoint or Oracle or Exchange or file level for VMware and Hyper-V, tear these down when you're done. They do use resources. You want to make sure you get those resources back to your appliance. You're not going to affect future backups or anything like that as well, or retention. When we talk about putting the entire SharePoint farm back, once again, you can only do this for single server instance, but you're going to choose your recovery point, full or differential. Once again, this is the single server application instance. And it has to be restored to the original SharePoint farm. And it needs to be online and available. Same name, same structure, everything back online. You're going to check to make sure there's already not a share in place. Make sure you didn't do a granular recovery checking it out and forget to tear it down. You can only have one restore running at a time. All right, when you choose that recovery point, it's going to create a synthetic recovery point, open that up and mount it, and then it goes through the recovery process to extract that back into the SharePoint environment from that location as well too. But it's all done as one complete synthetic recovery point. It's not going to create multiple jobs to put SharePoint back. Once again, when you're all done with this, you want to tear down the share. It will still remain open during the recovery process. You want to make sure your SharePoint environment's up and running and everything, and tear that share down when it's done. We're going to show you this in the demo once again later on. Now, there are some things you need to prepare for before you run a full SharePoint recovery. All right, you want to make sure you identify the backup and imported copy to use before the restore. And remember, it must go back to the same server. Verify that there's adequate space for recovery on that SharePoint server. Make sure you have space on that server. Make sure, once again, there's not already a share in place. You didn't try to do any kind of itemized recovery beforehand. You can only have one running at a time. That second job will be fail if it's not torn down. So again, you're going to run the recovery job, and then you're going to tear down that share when you're done. SharePoint recovery best practices. Once again, we recommend that you always follow Microsoft's best practices for SharePoint recovery and backup and recovery. All right, it's their product. We're going to really follow their recommendations as a backup provider as well, too. So we're kind of tied by their guidelines as well for recovery. But make sure you're following their recommendations as well, too. There also are a separate set of best practices and recommendations for the Kroll OnTrack product for SharePoint itemized recovery. Make sure you're following and keeping up to date with their releases, their updates, and their processes as well, too. And as always, remember to tear down any type of recovery that you do to avoid any kind of negative impact of backup performance or retention, anything like that. These things do utilize resources when you go through these recovery processes. So make sure you tear them down as soon as you're done. Next, we're going to watch the how-to video tutorial for mounting a SharePoint backup for granular recovery and performing a recovery using a simple server SharePoint backup.